Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Baldrige Foundation's Institute for Performance Excellence webinar, From Compliance to Excellence, Engaging Senior Leaders in the Performance Excellence Journey. As a reminder, due to the high number of participants, everybody will be kept on mute during the presentations. If you have questions, please submit them to the moderator in the Q&A box located on your control screen. Presenters will answer questions during our panel discussion. Before we get started today, I want to take a moment and recognize members of the Mac Baldrige Society and our newest member, Mary Greeley Medical Center, a 2019 winner of the Malcolm Baldrige National Quality Award from Ames, Iowa. Mac Baldrige Society members also serve as trustees of the Institute for Performance Excellence, and it is their generous support that makes presentations like today possible. And here's today's agenda. Our guest presenter is Paul Grizzell, Principal, Core Values Partners, and a longtime friend of mine and a great champion and ambassador for the Baldrige Framework. Following his presentations, we're going to have some questions from the audience and then a few closing remarks. So now I'm going to turn it over to you, Paul, to get us started.
Very good. Thank you, Al. Thanks for the opportunity to present this webinar today. Just a little bit about me. I know many of the people who are participating in the session today. I'm with Core Values Partners, a consulting company that our mission is helping organizations focus, align, and accelerate their performance excellence journey. I've got about 28 years of experience in Baldrige-based performance excellence consulting and work with many of the programs in the United States, including the AHCA-NCAL, American Healthcare Association Quality Award, which incidentally this year had over 1,400 applicants at various levels of participation. I also work with the European Quality Award and the China Quality Award, and help train examiners in the Thailand Quality Award, which uses the Baldrige Framework. This year we trained 225 examiners in Bangkok. I'm a foreign evaluation expert and on the academic committee for China Quality Award, which has a criteria that is very similar to Baldrige, and a co-author with Mark Blasey, who many of you know, of Insights to Performance Excellence, using the Baldrige Framework and other integrated management systems, published by American Society for Quality. What I want to be able to do today is get people enthused about the criteria. And one thing I always talk about is being able to bring performance excellence into everything that we do. And just as an example of that, here's a picture of me reading the Baldrige Framework to my 3-year-old grandson. My goal is that everybody's going to be enthused as Miles is in this picture about using the Baldrige Framework. So today's purpose is I want you to be able to answer the question of, why should I embark on a Baldrige-based performance excellence journey? Here's what I see a lot of times. Organizations say, okay, I'm intrigued by Baldrige, and we help them understand that it's not all about the award. And then the first thing that we talk about is putting together an application, which sounds very applying for an award. So we're going to try to address some of that through the webinar. There are two ways that I'm intending for participants to participate in this. If you are a leader who is wondering whether Baldrige is an appropriate journey for your organization to go on, that's what this webinar is all about. If you're a member of an organization that you think, gosh, I'd really like us to do Baldrige, but my senior leaders aren't on board, my hope is that the tools that I talk about today are things that are going to help you make the case for Baldrige and help those senior leaders understand the value of Baldrige beyond just an award application. So I start these presentations with this question to organizations of, do you have a culture of compliance or a culture of excellence? And I explain it this way. I see a lot of organizations that compliance is what they're all about. And as long as we meet our compliance requirements, that's what we're in business to do. And when you talk about excellence, they say, oh yeah, we've got an excellence department or an excellence focused employee, maybe over in the quality department. But if you were to talk to that person, they would say, it's so frustrating because there is not a focus on excellence in this organization. What I encourage organizations to think about is, how do we become an organization that has a culture that's focused on excellence? And please, I don't want anybody to leave this webinar and say, hey, Paul Grizzell talked about excellence and said that compliance isn't important. Compliance is absolutely important, but it ought to be the threshold for performance. Now, when I talk about that, moving from compliance to excellence isn't like flipping a light switch and saying, okay, we're going to change and next week we're going to be focused on excellence. It's a journey. I would encourage you to think about, if 100% compliance is a 1 and absolute role model excellence was a 10, where do you think your organization would fall on that scale of 1 to 10? Now, the other thing that I emphasize is that this is a key role of leadership, is making that decision to move to a culture of excellence and ensuring that that happens. This isn't something that can be delegated to the quality department to say, okay, move us to excellence from compliance. This is a role of senior leadership. Here's another way to look at it. Compliance is like regulatory requirements. It's the quality required to be in the business. It's what allows you to keep your doors open. Excellence, on the other hand, is things like Baldrige, Plan, Do, Check Act, Six Sigma, Lean, all of those things that don't say yes or no. Do we meet a requirement? They're not checklists. There's something that is you're constantly evolving to become better and better. And as that gap between compliance and performance excellence gets bigger, you're making progress towards world-class performance and competitive advantage. And that's what we're all in the business to be doing, is getting better and providing those services for our customers and other stakeholders. So what is Baldrige? It's an award application, right? Another trophy for the old trophy shelf. And I would say, no, that's not what it is. This is kind of an adapted definition of Baldrige that I use. The Baldrige Framework is an outcome-focused, evidence-based management model that represents the leading edge of validated leadership and performance practice. The reason I've highlighted those two phrases in blue is that I believe this is what sets the Baldrige Framework and other performance excellence models apart from regulatory surveys, things like that. First of all, outcome focused. You can have the most beautifully documented processes, but if those processes aren't getting results, category 7, then you need to be working on those processes. And the second phrase, evidence-based. This isn't Paul Grizzell saying you ought to do these things. This is based on 35 years of research by the Baldrige program to identify what best practices are, what effective practices are in high-performing organizations. So outcome-focused and evidence-based are two of the things that really set the Baldrige program apart from the regulatory, the compliance-focused sorts of things. So let's talk about the basics of the Baldrige framework. For those of you who are familiar with Baldrige, you've seen this diagram many, many, many times. I like to put a focus on that bottom band where it talks about core values and concepts. And you can see the core values of Baldrige spelled out beneath: systems perspective, visionary leadership, 11 core values that are the characteristics of high-performing organizations. Here they are again. These are the core values are in the Baldrige Criteria books in the business and nonprofit pages on pages 36 through 41, in the healthcare and education versions on pages 40 to 45. This is the list, and you can see there are slight differences in the healthcare version where it talks about patient-focused excellence. In the education version, it talks about student-centered excellence. And in societal contributions, it talks about societal contributions and community health in the healthcare version. Again, these are researched, a set of characteristics of what high-performing organizations look like. They have that systems perspective. They have visionary leadership. They have customer-focused excellence. They value their people. In those 5 pages that describe the core values, it is a great document to say, here's what high performance looks like. I'm going to give you a sample. This is the first paragraph of the valuing people core value. And personally, I think this first sentence is such a powerful sentence in that leaders can learn from. An organization's success depends on an engaged workforce that benefits from meaningful work, clear organizational direction, the opportunity to learn, and accountability for performance. Okay, sounds relatively simple, but when you think about it and think about, okay, does our organization look like that? If we were to talk to our workforce, would they say, yes, we have these opportunities? Again, these core values are based on many years of research by the Baldrige program, being able to identify what those characteristics of high performance are. The valuing people core value actually has about 5 paragraphs of information that describes what that high performing organization looks like. Here's an exercise that I suggest to organizations is, if you describe excellence as those 11 core values, I've tried to identify what just a basic compliance requirement would look like, kind of the opposite of a systems perspective, the opposite of visionary leadership. And in the same way that I talked about compliance to excellence, if you were to say where you are on the scale from one side to the other, if you had 1 to 10 points, do you have a silo mentality in your organization, or do you have a systems perspective? Do your leaders micromanage people, or is there visionary leadership that's demonstrated? Do you demonstrate customer-focused excellence, or do you just meet those basic requirements of your customers? Do you value your people? Do you value your workforce, or do you see employees as a commodity that can be laid off when things are bad because there's always somebody to hire out there? So I'm not going to walk through every one of these, but it's a great exercise to try to get a handle on where your opportunities for improvement are. Here's a key message to your organization. Are you satisfied with mediocrity as you go through this exercise and say where you are? Or do you aspire to excellence in the eyes of all your stakeholders? And I would be willing to bet that if anyone is participating in this session, they're not going to be satisfied with mediocrity. Now, here's an exercise that I encourage you to do with your senior leadership team. If you're a CEO, if you're a member of a senior leadership team, I encourage you to do this. In advance of the meeting, ask people to read those 5 pages of the core values. Don't worry about looking at the rest of the criteria book. Read those core values. Then come to a meeting and ask that leadership team as a group to identify what are the 3 core value strengths at our organization. And I always encourage 3 because that encourages them to focus on what the highest priorities are and the ones that they're best at. Typically, I see things like visionary leadership identified as one of the strengths, and sometimes management by fact. But then after you go through that exercise, ask what are the 3 core values, opportunities for improvement at your organization. I just lost the slides. Jerry? Okay, thank you. The second part of the exercise is to ask, what are the 3 core values, opportunities for improvement at your organization? And one thing I do here is I emphasize that opportunities for improvement don't necessarily mean weaknesses. It's what are the 3 things that it would be most important for you to work on to become that high-performing organization that you aspire to be. One core value that I would say 95% of the groups that I've done this exercise with is systems perspective. And if there's one thing that the Baldrige Framework helps do, it's to help address that challenge of having a systems perspective, having everybody work together. So this is an excellent exercise to get people thinking about high performance and thinking about where the strengths and the opportunities for improvement are. Now, I'm not expecting you to be able to read all of this, but this is based on something that I saw at the European Quality Award, where they talked about their fundamental concepts and how their criteria aligned with it. So what I've done is I've put the Baldrige core values on the left-hand side and the criteria across the top. And any place there's a blue box, that means there's something in that area that's going to help you become better at that core value. So look at the second one, visionary leadership. It isn't just the leadership category that's going to help with that. There are areas that are within multiple categories that identify things that senior leaders need to do that would make them more effective in their role and help ensure that there is truly visionary leadership in an organization. So I want to give an example of this. Well, first of all, this is an important concept. If you aspire to be represented by the Baldrige core values and concepts, if you read those 5 pages and think, yeah, I'd like for our organization to be represented by these core values, then the criteria is like the roadmap to get there. And I was thinking of what a good analogy of this would be. And it says, as if you're going on vacation and you've got all these folders that say, gosh, this resort is going to be so great. Okay, that's the core values. And you make the decision that's where we're going to go on a vacation. But then you have to do all the details to get there, the roadmap, the reservations, all of that. And that's like what the actual criteria can help you do is map that journey to become that high-performing organization. I want to give an example of that linkage all the way through the criteria. And one that I'm particularly interested in and have seen great value in is what's called a leadership system. In the organizational profile, the very first part of the of an application, it asks a lot of who are we and what's important to us questions. And one of the questions is, what are the key components of an organization's leadership system? Here's the glossary definition underneath: the way leadership is exercised formally and informally throughout the organization. I'm going to give you an example of an organization that has put together what I think is an excellent leadership system. And this is a veterans home in Ogden, Utah, that was a recipient of the highest level gold award in the American Healthcare Association process that uses the Baldrige Framework. And you can see what they've done is they've said, here's what's important for leaders to be able to accomplish at our organization, what we're going to hold leaders accountable for. So you can see at the top, starting with lead by example, then inspire and motivate others, to learn, to set direction, to ensure accountability, to communicate effectively. And those are the key things that they are looking for in leaders and expecting leaders to develop skills in. So once something like that is developed and you've identified what's important for leadership at your organization, here's how you use it. And you'll see multiple areas within the criteria that leadership system is used and actually used to drive improvement. You can use it to communicate leadership expectations. You can use it to align performance evaluations of leaders and others. To refine succession planning. So many people struggle with what's a process for succession planning. Well, when you've got a leadership system that says, here's what you want from leaders, you're able to identify potential successors and ensure over a period of time that they have the skills before they move into a new role. It's a great tool to recruit internal and external leaders because you know what your leaders need to know beyond just their functional role. It helps focus your leadership development, getting into the workforce category, and it helps you identify what those leadership results are that people struggle with back in the results category when you're looking for leader results. Most of all, it helps identify leadership opportunities for improvement by using it, again, making progress towards that visionary leadership core value. Now, another thing I want to talk about with the framework and the whole journey, this is again something that I learned from the European Quality Award. What they would talk about is we suggest that you put together your management document, and if you want to submit it for assessment, we're here to help you. So as opposed to talking about an award application where if you stand up in front of an all-employee meeting and say, we're going to apply for the Baldrige Award, people are saying, okay, I'm busting my butt every day, and you're going to be putting together an award application. If you start talking about, we're putting together our management document that's going to formalize the way we work, you start getting a lot more buy-in to the process. So when we talk about that management document, things are based primarily on thinking about those core values. But then the first part of that application, that management document, is a really important part, the organizational profile that identifies who are we and what's important to us at the highest level. A great tool to align that senior leadership team around those things to get consistency of an understanding of strategic challenges, strategic advantages, key changes in the marketplace. So who are we and what's important to us? Then the process categories 1 through 6 identify what do we do, how do we do it, and how do we improve. And finally, the results category identifies, were we successful? So you've got a story here that says, do we know who we are? Do we know what we do? Are we standardized in how we do things? And are we successful in what we do? And if not, we ought to be able to look at those unsuccessful results and say, well, back in the organizational profile, is this important to us? And if it is, then you ought to be able to look at the processes and say, what levers do we need to pull to change those processes to drive results to where we aspire to be? So think of that Baldrige application as your management document, a tool for sustainability. Let's talk a little bit about the Baldrige criteria itself. When we get into this, this is just another way to look at it. The organizational profile, and then the leadership, strategy, and customer categories. At the very highest level, leadership, understanding customers, and setting strategy is the driver categories, as some of us call it. The workforce and the operations category is the core work, people doing processes. Underneath is the measurement, analysis, and knowledge management center. It's like the brain center where data and information is to make decisions in those other areas. And finally, the results category. Again, were we successful? All built on that foundation of the core values. Isn't this what our work looks like sometime? And you know, I think about it this way. If you're a CEO of an organization, if you're on the senior leadership team, it's almost like this poor guy spinning plates, trying to be sure that leadership, that strategy, customer, measurement, analysis, and knowledge management, the workforce and operations are all working well. And one key to the criteria is that everything you do in your organization fits someplace in that criteria. I always say everything from organizational strategy to how often paper towels are checked in the men's room. Those of us who are experienced at Baldrige can tell you where that would fall within the Baldrige framework. A couple quotes from people that were extremely meaningful to me in attending Baldrige Quest for Excellence conference. The first one is, if you're in healthcare, you probably know who Don Berwick is, a thought leader on quality in healthcare. And I think it was probably about 2000 or 2001 that he spoke at Quest. And he said, the Malcolm Baldrige criteria is a great sense-making tool. And he's absolutely true. When you put together that management document, all of a sudden, you're seeing the sense of how things work together, how things need to work together. Another quote from 2005, Frank Sardone was the CEO of Bronson Methodist Hospital, and he talked about how they had had, I believe it was 5 site visits before they were a recipient. And each year they thought, this is the year we're going to win. And when they finally won, he said he looked back and he thought, if we had won it that first year, we wouldn't be anywhere near as good a hospital as we are now. And he said, what Baldrige helped us do is formalize the informal. That's one thing I see in my consulting role is lots of organizations that have informal processes that if one person leaves the organization, that knowledge leaves with them. That management document is a place to document how those things happen. So I like to think of the Baldrige assessment as a standard of performance excellence maturity. When you go to NIST headquarters, where we used to have Baldrige examiner training, they've got a museum where you can go in and you can see a metal bar that's about 39 inches long. Okay, that's the standard for a meter. You can see a weight, and that's the standard for a kilogram. I think that's the logic of the Baldrige program residing within NIST is Baldrige is a standard for performance excellence maturity. The program has done such a great job over the years of identifying what performance excellence is. So think of it as a standard of performance excellence maturity. The difference is between the framework and things like that kilogram and a meter is that things change. So the Baldrige program updates the criteria every 2 years based on what the changes are in the business, the healthcare, the education environment. This is the scoring rubric that's used for Baldrige, and you can see the emphasis on leadership in the process categories, and especially results. If you're not getting good results, you're not going to score as high as you need to be recognized at the higher levels. But thinking about that scoring, it's not just did we win or did we not win a level of recognition. That score measures the performance excellence maturity of your organization. And you're able to use that score over time to see your improvement. If you look through multiple Baldrige winning organization applications on the Baldrige website, you'll see some of them that have tracked this to say, here's our journey and our scores over the years that show that increase in maturity. If you are unfamiliar with Baldrige scoring, if you're used to this, which is what we're frequently used to in school, I want you to completely forget about this because Baldrige scoring is more like this. 0 to 5%, everything's kind of anecdotal. 10 to 15% beginning to use process, all the way up to 70 to 85%, a role model organization, 90 to 100%, boy, that's really rarefied air of performance. But organizations getting a start with Baldrige, typically in the 30 to 45% range, and the opportunity to find ways to move forward with their processes. 50% is a good organization. I had an organization one time get a first feedback report, and they called me and said, Paul, we flunked Baldrige. And I said, well, what do you mean by flunked Baldrige? They said, well, we got a 480. And I said, that's a great score for an organization that's just getting started. So remember that when you get your first feedback report and you think, oh my gosh, we're not any good. No, you're good. And the thing I find with organizations that are adopting the Baldrige framework is that they tend to be good to very good already, and they're not satisfied with that. They want to be a great organization, and the Baldrige framework is that roadmap to help them. Basics of the Baldrige assessment. Learning this is one of the most valuable things that come from the Baldrige criteria. That idea of approach, deployment, learning, and integration. And in category 7, the idea of levels, trends, comparisons, and integration as to how you look at the work that you do and the results that you get. This is the Baldrige framework in category 3. There are 3 levels, basic, overall, and multiple, that are higher levels of sophistication as you go through it. Those process evaluation factors are approach. How do we do it? What's the process? And then if we have a process, how extensively do we do it? Who does it and when? Learning, how do we evaluate and improve our processes? All of our processes, our leadership process, our strategy development process, and integration, are our processes aligned through our systems. This is another tool from the Baldrige Framework book. It's actually called Process Scoring Guidelines, which makes it sound like it's just for examiners, but I like to call this process maturity guidelines, and I encourage my clients, my organizations I work with, to make a copy of this, have it on their wall, and think about, for the responsibilities that they have, how mature are their processes. So you can see that in each of these maturity ranges, the first bullet is approach, the second bullet is deployment, the third bullet is learning or evaluation and improvement, the fourth bullet is integration. So this is a good way to self-evaluate on the areas for which you're responsible for, to think about that approach, deployment, learning, and integration. Results, levels, what is your current performance? Trends, what's performance over time? Comparisons, what's our relative performance? How do we stack up against appropriate comparisons? And integration, are you measuring important and expected results? And at higher levels of maturity, are they segmented appropriately? There's a results scoring guidelines matrix in the framework book. And again, I call this a results maturity guideline. You know, are you comparing your performance to others? I've talked to multiple organizations who say, well, our comparative data is us comparing ourselves to our past performance. No, that's your trend. You really need to look at your competitors or other appropriate comparisons to see, are we as good as we hope we are, or as good as we think we are? To me, this is the biggest Baldrige picture. The why. The fundamental concepts of excellence are the core values and concepts. We want to become an organization represented by these core values. The China Quality Award has what they call their basic ideas that match very closely to these core values and concepts. The European Quality Award used to have what they called their fundamental concepts. They now tend to align with the UN sustainability goals as opposed to the fundamental concepts. Again, I think that these core values and concepts, those 5 pages, are probably the most valuable part of your framework book, because it really does identify, here's what we aspire to be. The what is the characteristics of excellence, holding ourselves up against these somewhat complex characteristics, but again, based on 35 years of research by the Baldrige program. And how a structured approach to improvement. Let's identify what our OFIs are. Let's determine if we have an approach. Is it deployed? Are we evaluating and improving it? And is it integrated with other areas that it should be aligned to? When I talk about why Baldrige, lots of times I show this slide because, you know, when we talk about a performance excellence journey, we think about, gosh, we're with our coworkers. Isn't this going to be great? We're walking through a field of flowers. The road ahead is straight. And look at that green emerald city. That's like the vision ahead of us. Okay, I've got news for you. This is more what it's like. It's not an easy journey. There's a reason why so many organizations are mediocre, is that Excellence is hard work. It's easier to be a mediocre organization. But let me tell you, the Baldrige process can help you do a lot of things. First of all, it can hold your organization accountable. When you start documenting things in that management document, it's easier to say, this is the way we do things. This is the way we do strategic planning. This is the way senior leaders lead our leadership system. It helps sustain your organization. I always like to think of the example of a CEO who retires and at the retirement ceremony hands this management document to the incoming CEO and says, this is the way we got to where we are now. I look forward to hearing how you take us to the next level of performance. It helps align your organization by documenting things in one place that helps recognize that systems perspective within your organization. It helps improve your organization. I promise you that as you read those questions in the criteria, some of them you're going to say, oh yeah, we do that. Some of them you're going to say, I don't really even understand the question, but I know we don't do that. Okay, that's an opportunity for improvement. Helps recruit to your organization. I worked with a hospital that was recruiting a chief medical officer, and they had 4 candidates, and they sent their entire Baldrige application to each of the 4 and said, we'd like you to look through this before in-person interviews. Out of the 4 candidates, one of them read it. And that candidate came into the in-person interviews and explained what he could do to help address many of the things that were outlined in the management document. Guess who got the job? It's a great way to recruit, even if it's just the organizational profile that you share to say, here's who we are. We hope you'll join our organization. It's nice recognition and reward. You do have to apply to get that feedback report to be able to get a level of recognition to bring back to your organization. And finally, what I think might be the most important, it provides a common language of performance excellence throughout your organization. So what do you need to do now? My encouragement is get engaged with Baldrige, your state or regional program, or your national program. That's the best way to get involved, is take that step, jump in, ensure understanding and commitment of senior leaders. That core values exercise that I described is a great engagement exercise and one to help them understand the why of getting involved with Baldrige. Identify a candidate to be an examiner. This builds internal capability. It's also a great personal development opportunity for people. I tell people that being an examiner is, and really getting to know the framework is almost like getting a mini MBA. It's a great personal development opportunity. And Baldrige, the state and regional programs or national programs are always looking for examiners. Commit to internal and external assessment. It's a process to improve performance, not to win an award. Remember, the award is recognition of what you've done. It's not just writing and saying, here's who we are. Now, where do I go to accept my award? It's a tough journey, but it's an appropriate journey. And commit to addressing opportunities for improvement. Otherwise, it's a waste of time and money. The best start, write your organizational profile. 5 pages long. It identifies who we are, what's important to us, and that is just a great starting point for your organization. I always close with this slide, and I live in Minnesota, and if I put a picture of a Green Bay Packers coach, it's got to be a really great quote, because when you live in Minnesota, you hate the Green Bay Packers. But this quote from Vince Lombardi, coach of them in the 60s, perfection is unattainable, but if we chase it, we can catch excellence. Okay, our organizations are never going to be perfect. That's not any reason not to work towards really high performance. And when we do that, we're going to become that excellent organization that we aspire to. This is my contact information. I welcome any questions you might have. And I'll now turn it back to Al.
Hey, Paul, thank you for such an exciting and engaging and thought-provoking presentation. There are a bunch of questions here, so I'm just going to jump right in. The first one is, can you please talk about an organization, about how an organization can reconcile their established core values with the Baldrige core values, or should the organization simply move to and adopt the Baldrige core values?
That's a great question. And we're talking about two completely different things. In the organizational profile, it asks, what is your organization's vision, mission, values, and culture? So you've got your corporate values that say, here's how we work, here's how we treat each other, here's what's important to us. The core values of Baldrige are more something that's a description of, here's what high-performing organizations do. Now, when you look at those core values, you may look at your own values and say, you know what, we've got nothing in our values about valuing people. It may encourage you to re-look at your values, but I encourage organizations to think of the Baldrige core values and concepts as the description of a high-performing organization, and corporate values are going to be something that's more specific to the business you're in and what's important to your organization to do to succeed.
Okay.
I hope that made sense.
Our next question is about leadership, and how do you get leadership to make an honest assessment?
Great question. I would encourage that something like that exercise that I described of asking them, which are the core values that we do really well, and which ones do we need to improve on? I have not done that in an organization where we didn't get into some great discussion about the accuracy of that, what they needed to do. So what I find is organizations that are willing to start looking at Baldrige, again, like I said earlier, they tend to be good to very good and not satisfied with that. If they're hesitant to do any kind of assessment, then they're probably going to be hesitant to accept anything that comes back in that assessment. So that core values exercise is a great way to kind of test how people are going to feel about it.
Okay. Our next question is there an independent audit process?
Is there an independent audit process? I would say that the independent audit process is working with your state, local, national programs. I know some of my friends from Thailand and Europe and the Middle East are on. Whatever is the local program for you to work on or to work with, that is a great independent audit assessment. We typically don't like to use the word audit because it tends to fall back to more of the compliance side, but that assessment that will give you not just your opportunities for improvement, but will also identify your strengths. I think that's one of the best things about this program, is that a feedback report identifies, here's what you do well. You know what, as opposed to a a regulatory audit where it seems like all they're doing is looking for what's wrong. I use the analogy that a feedback report from Baldrige or one of its affiliated programs is like somebody standing next to you, putting their arm around you and saying, you know what, here's what you do really well. And here's what you need to do to move to the next level of performance. So not punitive in any way, very positive in its focus.
Okay. Our next question is, how important is it to engage senior leaders? Can I just start in my department?
Great question. I will tell you that if you're expecting the whole organization to follow your lead and you're in a department over here and senior leaders are not engaged at all and may even be saying, no, don't do this, you don't have time, you're probably not going to have much success. Now, I want to step back on that and say there are multiple examples of a hospital within a system, a factory within a larger organization who have used the Baldrige Framework and have been recognized at the national level. So I think Brian Lassiter from the Performance Excellence Program is on. We here in Minnesota had a unique organization apply many years ago. It was a 2-person science department at a local high school, and they were running their department using the Baldrige Framework. They went through the whole process. So if you're a department leader, there are many things that you can learn from the Baldrige Framework that are appropriate to driving higher performance in your department. State and local programs are very flexible in how they, in who can apply. So your department very easily could apply at a state level and get feedback on those strengths and opportunities.
So here's a similar question. You mentioned the leadership system. Who should be involved in developing the leadership system?
The people who should be involved in developing the leadership system are the senior leaders of whatever group it's looking at. The thing you don't want is for this to be delegated and for them to say, okay, HR department, the leadership development group, you need to develop our leadership system. Senior leaders need to come together. It doesn't take long, but come together and say, what are the key skills that we need to have as leaders in this organization? What's important to us? Things that I find that most organizations will say is that they'll say, well, they need to be able to communicate well. They need to be able to set direction. They need to be able to hold people accountable. But then there are frequently unique things that an organization may want leaders to be able to do. For instance, if you're a nonprofit, you may want people to be able to share the mission in a very effective way. So it is the leaders who need to develop it that are at the top of the organization.
Well, that one ties right into the next question, which is, what if my senior leaders aren't interested in Baldrige? How can I get them interested?
I would encourage you to be thinking about those things that I talked about of the why of Baldrige. And I will tell you that if I'm picking up my copy of the framework, if you go into their office and say, hey, I think we ought to do this, and they have the whole Baldrige framework without any explanation of what it's all about. It looks intimidating. That's not the way to approach it. If I were wanting to engage some senior leaders, I would tab the core values and concepts, and I would give it to one of those senior leaders, and I'd say, I'd like you to read these 5 pages. That's all I want you to read. And think about, is that the kind of organization we aspire to be? So focusing them on the why, as opposed to giving them the framework and just saying, I think we ought to do this. It then becomes, okay, we're applying for an award. Is that what we're doing? So focus on the why.
Okay. Well, that's all we have time for today. For those who submitted questions that we did not get to, we're going to forward those to Paul after the presentation, and he will get back with you directly via email. Paul, I want to thank you once again for just an outstanding presentation today and taking the time to share all of this with us and to include answering all those great questions.
Very good. Thanks.
The Foundation's Institute for Performance Excellence has more than 400 training and professional development certification opportunities offered online and at your own pace. This month, we are showcasing 3 certification courses directly related to today's presentations: Leadership Assessment, Leadership Styles, and Leading Teams. And these are courses for leaders at virtually all levels. You can visit the Institute website at baldrigeinstitute.org/education to learn more and to register. As a reminder, the recorded version of today's presentation and the slides will be available on the Foundation's website early next week. And once again, thanks to all of our great sponsors and donors. We hope to see you all again next month at next month's webinar on September 26th, where our guest presenter will be Josh Reset, who will discuss an overview of the Baldrige Foundation's Institute for Performance Excellence and why you may want to get engaged. Thanks again for attending this afternoon, and have a great day, everyone.